Morning. I'm a professor of literature and theater. The spaces where I'm most likely to interact with you are in the classroom or in a rehearsal room, not a pulpit, and this is a pulpit, no matter how much we try to downplay that reality. When Jansen asked me to speak in chapel, I had a really hard time deciding if I even wanted to say yes. The context of preaching is a strange one to me, one that, frankly, I've always had trouble trusting. But the thing that changed my mind was the question of whether or not I might have something of value that I felt needed to be said in a space like this. I think I do have something I would like to say to all of you. Whether it is something of value is up for you to decide. So here is my big question for you this morning. What do you actually like? Really? What do you actually like? One of my favorite art philosophers, Robert Henry, says it this way, quote, "It is not easy to know what you like. Most people fool themselves their entire lives through about this. Self-acquaintance is a rare condition," end quote. I give you this question, what do you actually like this morning? Because this is a question I have struggled with answering my whole life through. But the time I struggled with it the most was when I was in college. What do I actually like? What is my favorite color? Who is the person that I want a deep friendship with? What is the major that I am actually best suited to majoring in? What books do I truly like? Who am I actually attracted to? What am I doing because I like it, as opposed to doing it because I think I ought to be liking it? What clothes do I actually like wearing? What projects do I actually like spending time on? Where do I actually like living? What do I actually like? How often do you ask yourself this question? When do you take the time to recalibrate? I grew up in mainstream American Protestantism, that brand of Christianity that kind of claims to be non-denominational but still can't help but affiliate itself with some kind of denominational cornerstone. At the time, I would not have thought of my religious tradition as conservative, but now, retrospectively, I can see that I came from a tradition that was fearful of progress, doubt, and, interestingly, pleasure, things that you like. I can remember being a 9th grader at my church and being a part of a small group of other young women, all led by a 20-something woman who we'll call Clarissa. It's not a real name, Clarissa. Clarissa had been part of our church community for her entire life. She was petite, she was blonde, she was beautiful. After graduating high school, she completed dental hygienist school, and that was what she did for work. She got married when she was 18 years old, just a few days after her high school graduation. At the time I was in her group, she had an infant boy. I think she was 21 years old, and she was already pregnant with their second child. Clarissa and her husband lived in a truly adorable and IKEA-like apartment over her husband's parents' garage. Along with all the other 9th grade women in this small group, we were fascinated by Clarissa's life. Her husband, Jacob, was the only man she had ever kissed. They had courted, not dated, thanks to the popularity of a frustrating little book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Very often in our small group, the topic would come up about how many of us wanted a life similar to Clarissa's, to be married young, to have children quickly, to date for marriage, even to be a dental hygienist, in part because this was a career that could catapult us more quickly into adulthood, rather than the full 4 years required for a college degree. I remember going with the flow during my time in Clarissa's small group. I had a boyfriend at the time, and our group often discussed our romantic relationships in terms of future marriage. Looking back now, as a 30-something woman, I do not know what possessed Clarissa to think it was appropriate or even healthy to let us speak so resolutely about dating for marriage when we were 9th graders, but we were products of a religious tradition that functioned this way. In a way, I can't blame her for living out the ideals she believed to be true. I tell you this story about me as a ninth grader because it's one of the earliest young adult memories I have of realizing that I didn't like what other people around me seemed to like. I felt repulsion whenever my ninth grade boyfriend would try to talk to me about marriage. To be honest, I felt the same repulsion when my college boyfriend tried to talk to me about marriage. My friends in Clarissa's small group claimed that they wanted an early marriage, a job that allowed them to stay home with their children, or the ability to leave their jobs entirely to be stay-at-home parents. They wanted children, and they wanted lots of them, fast. They wanted small-town life. They wanted to dress like Clarissa, who always looked like she had walked straight out of an Old Navy advertisement. When I asked myself what I actually liked during that time of my life, it looked nothing like Clarissa. I didn't like Old Navy. I don't like how you have to buy a new t-shirt every 4th of July with matching flip-flops. It's a waste of money. I wasn't interested in getting married or even thinking about marriage, especially not in ninth grade. I wasn't sure I even wanted to have children. I didn't want to be a dental hygienist, and I definitely didn't want to live in a small town. If the life I've just described to you is something that resonates with you, then by all means, live that life and live it well. But it was not for me. No, that was not it. Inevitably, when you ask yourself this question, what do you actually like? You begin to differentiate yourself. It's a risky question to ask if you're someone who enjoys being considered traditional. Another odd aspect of my religious upbringing was a strange distaste for pleasure. I can remember a lot of sermons in youth group that seemed to argue that if you aren't putting all of your efforts into ministry or evangelism, then you are wasting your time on meaningless pursuits. This was a hard thing for me to hear since I was totally engrossed in theater and drama club at school. I loved performing and working on plays, and often the message I received from church leaders was that I needed to be putting that creative energy into serving the church. Anything else was just serving myself. There was this strange sense that if you were having fun with something non-church related, that you were taking pleasure in something outside of church, then that thing must be bad. I think that this is very wrong. Pleasure, joy, liking something or someone is a clue for your own self-acquaintance. When you ask that question, what do you actually like? You are inviting the universe to put you in touch with the things that make you, as a human, live more intensely. And I think many of you in this room grew up in some kind of Christian tradition like I did. Maybe you need to ask yourselves this question in relation to the church. Here's an example of what I mean. I'm an English professor, and my least favorite response to the question, "What is your favorite book?" is when students say, "Oh, the Bible, of course." Really? Is the Bible actually your favorite book? Ever? I know it's got some lovely, likable parts. I really do. And I know that we treat it as a sacred text, but are you honestly telling me that you like every stitch of the Bible? What about the genealogies? What about the ethnocentrism? What about the racism? What about the genocide? What about that whole section of the Old Testament about the young woman who is raped and literally cut into pieces for no good reason? Do you like that? Are you brave enough to ask yourself that question of what you actually like when it comes to something as serious as your relationship to the transcendent? Are you willing to trust yourself to use the word like as a tool for understanding yourself? It's hard, isn't it? I'm not saying that you outright reject all of the things that you don't like. You can respect something like the Bible without honestly liking every bit of it. You can follow through on your responsibilities for being a functioning human being, even if you don't like some of those responsibilities. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself. One of the wonderful things about being in the English department is that I have regular conversations with students who end up as English majors after trying out all kinds of other majors that they thought they wanted to be, that they thought were more sensible. They don't consider that being an English major or a theater minor might allow them to become more fully developed human beings who are deeply in touch with what they like, and therefore exactly the kind of well-rounded human that someone might like to hire. I love it when I have a student in one of my classes who finally has that moment of recognition where they say, yes, these are my people, this is what I like. Have you had that moment here at Greenville? If you haven't, I hope that you will. If you never do, then maybe this isn't the place where that moment of recognition will happen. That's okay, that's information. The ancient Greeks would describe this sensation I'm talking about, this sense of knowing what you like, in a spiritual sense. The word enthusiasm, in its original Greek, means to be possessed by a god, or to have the divine, to have the God rush through you. So if you felt an extreme sense of attraction to someone, then you might say, yes, Aphrodite just rushed through me. If you felt an extreme sense of desire to go to battle, you would say, yes, Athena just rushed through me. Here's the biggest thing, though. It is pleasurable for the god to possess you. The god doesn't fill you with a sense of responsibility or obligation. The god fills you with pleasure over something. It feels good to experience enthusiasm. Your great test is to discern when you are experiencing true enthusiasm or when you are mistaking it for a sense of someone telling you what you ought to do, when really that thing isn't what you ought to be doing at all. So, when you ask yourself what you actually like, you're also asking yourself when the divine, when God has possessed you. When God, or something very like God, has possessed you. What a beautiful way of perceiving what you actually like. The last thing I'll say to you on this topic of asking yourself what you actually like is to give you a bit of advice for how to discern it. Yes, you should seek those moments where you feel possessed by the divine. You should seek those moments of enthusiasm. But you also need to do the work of recording them so that you don't forget them. Do you keep a journal or a notebook or a collection of Post-it notes in a shoebox? I think you should. I don't often presume that my English professor bookish ways of being in the world will work for everyone, but this is one thing that I believe in very deeply. People should write things down. Flannery O'Connor once wrote, quote, "I do not know what I think until I read what I say. I do not know what I think until I read what I say." I would add that I do not really know what I am thinking until I engage in the act of writing. I don't trust the intangible thoughts that are floating across my mind's eye when I'm processing an experience, but I do trust my right hand, my purple pen, and a sturdy notebook. And I know I'm not alone. I once heard a rumor that Mikey Ward has a giant box somewhere filled with his field notes notebooks. I've heard that it's fireproof, a fireproof safe. Is that true? Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I believe it. People like Mikey Ward should be trusted. And I think that I'd trust anyone who had such things said about them, even if they weren't verifiably true. The mere suspicion of an extant box of notebooks is a compliment in and of itself. And this is why. People who write things down write down what they are learning, what they see, what they desire, what frustrates them. These people see themselves more clearly. These people know what they like. I've been journaling consistently since I was a freshman in college, about 13 years ago. For my first year of college, I was living in New York City, and I was very far away from my family. I bought a black moleskin notebook at a bookstore in Greenwich Village, and for the first time ever, I had a genuine desire to start recording things. I wasn't exactly lonely, but it was definitely the first time I noticed that my understanding of the world's diversity was entirely limited. Coming from a suburb in Georgia, I was pretty overwhelmed by the massive convergence of cultures that is New York City. It was tremendous, and I think I implicitly understood that I would need to process this new world in writing. This is why you should write. There's not much point in reveling in enthusiasm if you can't make sense of why that enthusiasm is meaningful. Otherwise, it's just empty spectacle. Writing things down is a way to make sense of the drama of living. Be like Mikey Ward. Write things down. Take pleasure in one day generating rumors that you too have a box of notebooks somewhere. Enthusiasm must be cultivated. Knowing what you like must be cultivated. You can't make yourself be enthusiastic. You can't force yourself to like things. You can't force the divine to rush through you. You have to put yourself in situations, sometimes risky ones, where you can set yourself up to experience enthusiasm. It is a choice to see the world through the lens of intensity, richness, narrative, and spectacle. What do you actually like? Are you brave enough to seek an answer to that question? What do you actually like? I'll end with my own centering prayer that I use when I need to process something or when I need to be prepared for something. If you've been in my classes before, or you've worked on a show with me before, this will be familiar. It's written by a literary critic named Alfred Kazan. If you're comfortable, you can bow your heads with me. I pray to get beyond myself, to indicate to this believing unbeliever that there exists a territory beyond this bundle tied up so angrily in the night. I pray to be relieved of so much self. I ask to be extended. Amén. Gracias por escuchar.